In early 1991, coalition forces dropped nearly 90,000 tons of explosives on Iraqi targets. Yet the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard famously declared that the Gulf War did not take place. To be clear, Baudrillard wasn't denying the loss of life or the physical devastation of infrastructure in the desert. Instead, he argued that the physical military engagement was entirely distinct from the heavily orchestrated media spectacle broadcast to the rest of the world. What viewers consumed at home was a simulacrum, a carefully engineered hyper-real construct replacing the messy reality of combat with a highly controlled narrative. To understand how this happened, we have to look at the military's media strategy after Vietnam, how digital imagery substituted for physical conflict, and how an entirely hyper-real event was architected from the ground up. The Gulf War requires us to look past the clash of armies and analyze a masterpiece of media engineering and informational deterrence. During the Vietnam War, journalists had relatively unrestricted access to the battlefield. The resulting broadcast of American casualties was later diagnosed by military planners as a critical strategic liability that eroded domestic support. Consequently, new protocols for media control were rigorously tested. You can track this restriction of access on a timeline, moving from the wide-open reporting of Vietnam through the tightly gated bottlenecks of the Falklands and Panama, terminating in a completely closed loop by Desert Storm. Those smaller interventions functioned as beta tests, allowing the military to refine exactly how to corral, transport, and monitor embedded reporters. By 1991, commanders recognized that dominating the broadcast images of the conflict was equally as vital to mission success as dominating the physical terrain. Independent verification of events was systematically eliminated. Reporters could no longer freely maneuver to document the destruction or the casualties. The military apparatus itself became the primary producer, editor, and distributor of the war's visual evidence. Desert Storm was the first major global media crisis orchestration. The military successfully neutralized the press by integrating them directly into the public relations machinery. The defining visual artifact of this PR machinery was the specific footage fed directly to television networks, the black and white nose camera feeds of laser-guided smart bombs. This framing was highly intentional. It engineered the narrative of a clean war, a surgical operation devoid of human suffering, illustrating only technological supremacy. Leading up to the ground offensive, American forces trained extensively using early networked simulation machines, known as SimNet. Look at the visual language of the simulator interface on the left next to the smart bomb footage broadcast to the public on the right. Both feature the exact same abstract crosshairs, the same absence of human figures, and the same sterile targeting reticles. The boundaries between simulation and reality blur completely when the data used to practice the war matches the broadcast footage of the actual conflict. Baudrillard referred to this as fighting the war in vitro, a conflict executed by soldiers and consumed by the public entirely through the interface of screens. This aesthetic strips away the moral weight of kinetic violence. It gamifies the experience for a domestic audience watching from their living rooms. The clean war was a calculated cosmetic facelift. It was a virtual environment specifically designed to deter domestic anti-war sentiment by rendering the violence entirely abstract. To Baudrillard, a traditional war necessitates a dual antagonistic relation between two relatively matched adversaries. Desert Storm lacked this symmetry. With overwhelming technological superiority, coalition forces executed a programmatic, relentless bombardment that rarely allowed for direct engagement. The actual kinetic consequences of this asymmetry were deliberately omitted from the primary media cycle, most notably the Highway of Death, where retreating Iraqi forces were systematically decimated on the road to Basra. Military planners suppressed these specific images out of fear that they would drastically alter public sentiment and force an early end to operations. The horrific reality of charred bodies directly contradicted the established, sanitized Hollywood script of the high-tech, clean war. The military prioritized the integrity of the virtual narrative, censoring any kinetic truth that threatened to shatter the established script. The assumption of transparency was bolstered by CNN's 24-hour live coverage. Viewers assumed that a real-time feed of data equated to objective truth. Baudrillard saw it differently. He argued CNN acted as a stethoscope attached to a hypothetical heart, broadcasting undecidable symptoms and white noise rather than actionable clarity. We can map this effect. A central event is bombarded by so much conflicting data, press briefings, expert analysis, chyrons, that it creates information aporia, a state where the sheer volume of data actively destroys the public's ability to locate the truth. The deliberate proliferation of archival footage, conflicting strategic hypotheses, and endless expert commentary doesn't inform the public, it paralyzes them. This oversaturation functions as a calculated form of deterrence, intended to flatten the audience into passive consumers. This brings us to hyperreality, the state where the virtual and the real fuse together into a third order of reality. The simulacrum of the war, the curated images and televised briefings, achieved real-world kinetic effects, successfully securing Allied funding and maintaining strict domestic coalition support. The distinction between what is fake and what is physically real becomes obsolete when the simulation itself dictates the execution of foreign policy. An infinite supply of real-time data does not illuminate an event, it actively dissolves it, replacing history with a malleable, weaponized stream of information. For Baudrillard, the ultimate symbol of this unintelligible, confusing media event was this widely broadcast image of an oil-soaked cormorant lying on the beach. It represented the emergence of a terrifying new military apparatus, one that wields the same absolute power over the production and circulation of images as it does over physical bodies and machines. The physical clash of armies in the desert was entirely secondary to the massive, successful deployment of media deterrence. The Gulf War did not take place because the programmed simulation preceded, contained, and ultimately replaced the kinetic reality of the conflict. The legacy of Desert Storm is a blueprint for modern geopolitical operations, proving that the battlefield of public perception is the primary theater of combat. We inhabit the hyperreal era. The representation of an event is the event, and wars are won the moment the public accepts